February 20th, 2026. A woman steps out of a black SUV at a luxury mountain resort in Jalisco. The driver carries her bag to cabin 39. She's visiting her boyfriend of 3 years. 24 hours later, that boyfriend would be dead, and dozens of people across Mexico would follow him into the ground. The woman's name was Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. Her boyfriend was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man the world knew as El Mencho, leader of a $50 billion criminal empire. This is the story of how the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere spent his final day alive, and how a targeted military raid triggered widespread cartel violence across Mexico. El Mencho wasn't born a kingpin. July 17, 1966, Aguililla, Michoacán. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes grew up in the kind of poverty that doesn't show up in statistics. He dropped out of school in 5th grade. His first job was picking avocados. His early years were spent working in agriculture before he entered the drug trade. By the time he turned 20, he'd crossed into California looking for work that didn't involve a machete or a rifle. What he found instead was a criminal apprenticeship that would shape the next 4 decades. 1986, San Francisco. Police arrested a young man calling himself Ruben Avila for possession of stolen property and a loaded firearm. The man was Oseguera Cervantes, using his first alias. He was deported. 6 years later, September 1992, San Francisco. Federal agents arranged a buy, 5 ounces of heroin for $9,500. 2 men showed up to make the deal. One was Nemesio. The other was his older brother, Abraham Oseguera Cervantes, known in the family as Don Rodo. When the cuffs came out, Nemesio made a choice. He pleaded guilty. He took the fall. He accepted a federal sentence so his brother wouldn't face life behind bars. That choice cost him 3 years. What it bought him was loyalty, a reputation, and a network of contacts that would prove useful when he returned to Mexico in 1997 at age 30. Back home, Oseguera Cervantes became a cop. He worked as a municipal police officer in Cabo Corrientes and Tematlan, small towns in Jalisco where the line between law enforcement and organized crime had long since blurred. The badge didn't last. Eventually, he left the force and joined the Multinational Cartel, a trafficking organization with deep roots in Michoacán and Jalisco. He wasn't a foot soldier anymore. He was learning the business from men who moved tons of methamphetamine and cocaine into the United States every month. Then came 2010. Ignacio Nacho Coronel, a senior leader in the Sinaloa cartel and a key ally of the Multinational Cartel, was killed in a shootout with the Mexican army. His death fractured alliances. The Multinational Cartel splintered. Oseguera Cervantes saw an opening. He co-founded a new organization with a name designed to send a message, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. And he took command of its enforcer wing, a death squad called Los Matazetas, the Zeta Killers, formed specifically to wage war against the brutal Zetas cartel that had terrorized the region for years. CJNG didn't rise quietly. They announced themselves with executions, with videos, with displays of firepower that made the Mexican military look outgunned. May 1st, 2015. Villa Purificación, Jalisco. A Mexican military helicopter, a Eurocopter EC-725 Cougar, was participating in Operation Jalisco targeting cartel leadership when CJNG enforcers fired a rocket-propelled grenade. The helicopter went down. 9 soldiers and security personnel died. It was the first time in modern Mexican history that a cartel had shot down a military aircraft. The world understood then what the Mexican government had been trying to contain. CJNG operated as a full paramilitary force. El Mencho himself stayed invisible. Few confirmed photographs. No public appearances. A $15 million U.S. bounty. Between 2020 and 2024, multiple reports claimed he died of kidney failure in a private hospital in Jalisco. Rival cartels spread the story. Intelligence analysts debated it. Some believed it. They were wrong. Oseguera Cervantes was alive, moving between safe houses, rotating security teams, avoiding phones, avoiding patterns, avoiding the one thing that gets every fugitive caught: predictability. Except he made an exception for Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. She wasn't a cartel operative. She wasn't family. She was his partner, someone he'd been with for 3 years. And on February 20th, 2026, she was driven to the Tapalpa Country Club, a tourist resort nestled in the mountains of Jalisco. The resort had a problem. It had been flagged by the U.S. Treasury Department as a money laundering front tied to CJNG, which meant it was under surveillance. which meant every guest, every vehicle, every arrival was logged. Guadalupe arrived at a private cabin in Tapalpa. She stayed overnight there with El Mencho. Saturday afternoon, February 21st, she left. A cartel driver picked her up. Military intelligence had been tracking the network's movements in the days leading up to the visit. The moment she stepped out of that cabin, she sealed the location of the most wanted man in Mexico. If you've stayed this far, you're seeing how surveillance, loyalty, and one quiet decision can collapse an empire. Hit subscribe, because stories like this don't show up in headlines the way they actually happened. February 22nd, 2026, just before dawn. Mexican Special Forces, backed by intelligence from U.S. Northern Command, moved into position around Cabin 39. El Mencho was inside with his elite security team. The raid wasn't subtle. Gunfire erupted immediately. The cartel enforcers returned fire with automatic rifles. The firefight lasted long enough to wake the entire resort. When the shooting stopped, 8 cartel members were dead. 1 member of the security forces was dead. And Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes had been shot multiple times. Special Forces medics loaded him onto a military evacuation helicopter. The plan was to get him to a hospital in Mexico City. He didn't make it. Somewhere over the mountains, surrounded by the soldiers who'd hunted him for more than a decade, the leader of a $50 billion criminal empire died. No dramatic last words. No negotiation. Just a body in a helicopter, and the realization across Mexico of ongoing uncertainty surrounding cartel leadership. War followed immediately. CJNG enforcers mobilized across multiple regional strongholds. They erected numerous roadblocks across the region. They torched cars. They burned businesses. They attacked National Guard checkpoints. The violence was immediate, coordinated, and brutal. By the time the smoke cleared on February 23rd, 73 people were dead, including 25 members of the security forces. The message was clear. Even in death, El Mencho's cartel could bring the country to a standstill. But the violence revealed something else. It revealed cracks. CJNG's command structure hadn't collapsed, but it hadn't held together smoothly either. Regional commanders acted independently. Rival factions within the cartel began jockeying for control. And the Mexican government, for all its losses, had proven something. Even the most elusive target could be found if you watched the people he loved. April 2026. The Mexican Navy arrested Audius Flores Silva, known as El Jardinero, a high-ranking regional commander in Nayarit. It was the first major arrest in the Post-Mencho power vacuum. It wouldn't be the last. August 5th, 2026. The U.S. Department of Justice unsealed indictments against 5 senior CJNG leaders. One of them was Hugo Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, El Mencho's godson, known as El Sapo. Another was Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez, El Chorro, a former son-in-law. The indictments were detailed, naming specific drug shipments, money laundering routes, and enforcement operations. On the same day, the U.S. State Department announced a new reward: $25 million for the capture of Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as El Pilon. He was El Mencho's stepson. And according to U.S. intelligence, he was now the leader of CJNG. The bounty was among the largest ever offered by the U.S. government for a criminal figure. It was also a recognition that the organization hadn't died with its founder. It had adapted. El Pilon was born in the United States, which made him a unique target. Unlike his stepfather, he couldn't hide behind Mexican sovereignty. U.S. law enforcement could pursue him directly. And yet, 6 months after his stepfather's death, he remained free, directing operations from somewhere inside Mexico's vast criminal underworld. The $50 billion empire El Mencho built didn't vanish when he died following the raid into Tapalpa. It fractured, but it didn't break. CJNG still controls methamphetamine production in Jalisco. It still moves fentanyl precursors from China through Mexican ports. It still operates smuggling routes into the United States that generate billions of dollars a year. What changed was the center of gravity. Without El Mencho's authority to mediate disputes, the cartel became more volatile, more violent, more willing to fight itself. And the human cost kept climbing. Jacqueline, a mother searching for her daughter who disappeared after refusing to work for CJNG recruiters, described the trap that thousands of young women face. Criminal organizations that traffic women always give them a choice: work for them, or they will kill their family. I believe my daughter refused. and they killed her. Her daughter's remains were finally identified in 2025 after years of searching. Jacqueline joined a Collectivo, a volunteer search group made up mostly of mothers, digging through clandestine graves across Jalisco. She's one of thousands. The violence that keeps CJNG running doesn't show up in cartel revenue estimates. It shows up in mass graves, in missing person reports, in families who will never get answers. El Mencho understood that fear was infrastructure. In August 2021, his cartel released a video threatening journalist Azucena Uresti after she criticized him on air. The threat was explicit. "I assure you that wherever you are, I will find you and I will make you eat your words even if they accuse me of femicide." Uresti was placed under government protection. The threat worked. For years, Mexican journalists avoided naming CJNG directly. Some still do. That same logic applied to rivals, to police, to politicians, to anyone who stood in the way. El Mencho built CJNG on the principle that overwhelming force, applied consistently, would make resistance futile. For more than a decade, that principle held. Governments negotiated. Rivals retreated. Communities stayed silent. And the cartel grew. But on February 22nd, 2026, in a luxury cabin in the mountains, that principle met its limit. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man who evaded satellites, drones, and armies, made one human choice. He wanted to spend a quiet day with someone he cared about. That choice left a trail. The Tapalpa Country Club still operates. Cabin 39 is still available for rent. The resort's management has denied any knowledge of who stayed there in February. Mexican authorities have seized properties in the area, and the U.S. Treasury sanctions remain in place. Tourists still visit, unaware that one of the most defining law enforcement operations in Mexican history unfolded in the woods behind the main lodge. El Mencho's family scattered. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, was arrested in 2021 on money laundering charges and remains in Mexican custody. His daughter, Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, was sentenced to 30 months in a U.S. prison for violating sanctions by conducting financial transactions on her father's behalf. His son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, has been in U.S. custody since 2020 and was convicted in September 2024 on drug trafficking and weapons charges. The family that once controlled billions is now fragmented, imprisoned, or on the run. And yet the cartel endures. CJNG operates in nearly all Mexican states. It has cells in the United States, Europe, and Asia, and distribution networks in Australia. It's involved in drug trafficking, human smuggling, fuel theft, extortion, kidnapping, and illegal mining. The organization El Mencho built functioned as a franchise model, decentralized enough to survive the loss of its founder. The final 24 hours of El Mencho's life weren't cinematic. There was no dramatic standoff. No defiant last stand. Just a man in a cabin, a surveillance team with patience, and a raid that ended the way most fugitive stories end, in blood, in a helicopter, and in silence. The empire didn't collapse. It splintered. The violence didn't stop. It multiplied. And the $50 billion machine that Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes spent 3 decades building kept running without him, because the infrastructure he created was never dependent on one man. It was dependent on fear, on demand, and on the fact that someone will always step in to fill the void. If any of this stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories like this, and most of them are still unfolding.